Hi, my name is Doctor Warrick Bishop and welcome to my podcast and videocast station. Today I've got a guest who's returning, Alistair Horscroft. Thank you so much for coming back. By way of a little bit of background, Alistair's a Renaissance man. He's going through a rebirth himself and is evaluating what the next steps look like. But some of the past has been naturopathy. It's been nutrition. He's got an entrepreneurial interest. He's got an interest in psychology and psychological support. He's been called a street philosopher, and I know he's interested in also keeping fit and strong. Welcome, Al. How are you?
Thanks, Warwick. Thanks so much for having me again. I thoroughly enjoyed our last chat. Look forward to this one. This one's going to be a little bit more body health than mind, but hey, they matched and meet, don't they?
Absolutely. And look, it's been a pleasure to be in touch. For those who haven't listened to the first time that I had the chance to speak with Al, look it up. The easiest way to find a podcast is to go to my website and use the AI bot in the bottom right-hand corner. Put in there Al's details and the podcast episodes will come up and you can have a listen. And look, since we first caught up, and that was thanks to the introduction through my brother, Al and I have kept in touch. And on this occasion, we're going to be talking about proteins, protein powder, amino acid powder, and, supplementing to try and keep strong. So a lot of people talk about protein powder. Al, why is it such a big deal?
Well, I think I realized it was such a big deal, Warwick, after I suffered the consequences of perhaps too long being a vegetarian and a vegan. Back in the day, I had a meat-centric diet, and then around my teenage years, as we do, we want to fight the powers that be and stand up for a cause, and we get that kind of teenage information from other teenagers, and I was listening to maybe too much of the Smiths, and meat became murder, really. And so I kind of really went in onto the vegan bandwagon, and the school I was at was actually vegetarian. My parents went vegetarian, and looking back, I think I really struggled. I was a very high caliber athlete at the time, and I think I never met or achieved my outcome. And I think if I look back, it was due to a lack of protein. That's the honest truth of the matter. And so when I returned to eating meat again, and focusing on protein, and back then it was protein powder, whey protein powder, I found a significant leap, obviously, in exercise capacity, sporting capacity, thought process. And it was just so obvious to me that had been the missing macro for me. Alongside, if I look back again, probably an excess of carbohydrate as well. As you get older, obviously, when I was young, you could burn anything. But as I kind of started hitting mid-20s, early 30s, even the carbs started becoming an interesting factor.
So for those listening, some of the things that you would be relating to are where proteins are key right throughout the body. They're almost every structural component of our tissues, from muscles to bones to you name it. Hair starts life as a protein. Everything is really structurally surrounding proteins, which probably means that we do need to consume a certain amount on a regular basis. Can you give people any guidance about how much people should be eating when it comes to protein? Like, is a steak a week enough, or should you have a piece of chicken every other day? How do you think about that these days, Al?
Well, look, as I said, I was a naturopath and studied nutrition back in London, but that was probably nearly 25 years ago. I'm retraining now. And it's interesting kind of retraining. I'm mid through becoming a registered nutritionist in Australia. And yeah, there are certain standards that they have, but you go onto an average podcast, you talk to carnivores, you talk to ketos, you talk to standard American diet, and everyone has a different kind of version of that. And I think that's true, because I think the supporting nutrients of either carbohydrates or fats do actually kind of to a degree influence, your protein intake. But most importantly is the quality of that protein would also be indicative of the grammage of protein. So let's say the average thing that most kind of bodybuilders or even weekend warriors or gym goers go, you go to a nutritionist and they're going to say kind of 1 gram per pound. of body weight. Yeah. And that is your aimed for body weight. So say, for example, you're 200 pounds and you're aiming to be 170 pounds, then you'd want 170 grams of protein. Yeah. So a lot of people think it might be 200, but it's not. So you're going for the grammage per pound of your ideal body weight that you're aiming for. Okay.
Okay.
But
But I'll jump in there briefly. Do you have a metric measure on that? A gram per?
well, if we turn it to kilos, you kind of nearly half it, and don't you? Just under half it. So it would be kind of 90 kilos is about 200 pounds, you know, so you're using 0.5 per kilo.
Okay. Yep.
Approximately.
Yeah.
But I think the interesting thing there, Warwick, is I think a really interesting thing to understand about protein is in many ways, I don't think about protein in the way that other people think about protein. I think about protein as a vehicle that carries amino acids. So for me, it's amino acids that are the most important thing, not the protein per se. Yeah, a protein is a kind of a chain of amino acids, and so every protein structure, as you said before, you know, proteins make up our muscles and our bones. We're all aware of that, but people are less aware that amino acids make up hormones, enzymes, even many of our neurotransmitters. You see, and so when we think about a protein, it's very generic, but when we think about amino acids, we can be potentially a little bit more targeted and also understand absorption rates and that kind of stuff. So think of every protein you eat, from an egg to a protein powder to a steak to your legumes, are carriers of amino acids. And the question we have to ask is how many amino acids do they carry, and are they good carriers of amino acids?
Yeah. Okay. And look, it's as you were talking, it's likely the case that as we consume proteins, in fact, the acid in our stomach and the proteinases produced by our pancreas are actually breaking those proteins down to those amino acid structures so they can be more readily absorbed through the body. And I guess that the body uses amino acids. It doesn't take pieces of protein and try and incorporate that into what the body's trying to build. So focus on amino acid makes perfect sense, actually.
Well, let's take, for example, collagen. You know, collagen is, the big thing at the moment. Everyone's consuming vast amounts of collagen. But collagen isn't a complete protein structure. You know, it misses kind of tryptophan, as an essential amino acid, and also has low amounts of other, essential aminos that aren't in high enough quantities to really allow it to be a full, essential amino acid, So taking huge amounts of collagen, thinking that you're taking huge amounts of protein, for example, is an error in thought. Yeah. And so I know a lot of people, for example, in the gym or ladies who are trying to up their protein intake, because it's well known that I think about 50. I mean, look, again, it depends what stats you're saying, Warwick. This is what's so tricky about it. But I think it would be much more than the 15 or 20% of women are low in protein. I would say it would be significantly higher than that. But hey, let's just throw it out there. I think that most people are actually low in protein, to be honest, regardless of what the research or the stats show. It's just what you're comparing against. But let's say, for example, women are using collagen as their protein supplement. That is an error of thought because it is not a complete protein supplement. Yeah. So it might be improving your skin to a degree, but it might not be helping the other areas of your body, like hormones, bone, neurotransmitters.
Yeah. And so, look, I think this distinction between consumption of protein and consumption of amino acid is super important. No question that there's some level of protein deficiency or amino acid deficiency consumption across the community for various reasons, probably from dietary choices. You alluded to a vegan or vegetarian style diet that could contribute as well. As people change and get older, do they have a greater requirement for protein? Do they become less efficient at absorbing amino acids and proteins and therefore require a top up? What's your understanding there? I'm asking because I've sort of heard that as a passing comment and be interested in your thoughts.
So there's a word called sarcopenia. I believe that's how you pronounce it. Forgive me if I haven't, but I think that's an accurate pronunciation, which is the age-related loss of muscle mass. So the question is why would that occur? Well, I think it occurs for a number of reasons. We know that doing weights and weight-bearing loads obviously creates demands on the body to build stronger muscle, and bone density. So we know that there's a reason why people are losing muscle mass. They're simply not putting their bodies under enough stress or weight to demand the body builds. So that's the first case. And the second, like we said, it's obviously the People are having low protein diets, and also probably a compromised absorption, through the gut, due to leaky gut or poor kind of gut health.
Which would probably mean that something like an amino acid might actually be an easier thing for those individuals to absorb, possibly.
I really do believe so. And I think, again, this is where an accurate understanding of amino acids, and, I'm no scientist, so obviously we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. Do you know what I mean? And making our research to the best of our ability from, kind of gold standard research, so. But branch chain amino acids, for example, which is something that has been touted, I would say the research shows almost useless, for example. So if people go to the kind of the chemist and they're thinking they're getting a good protein with a branch chain amino acid, I'd say, well, why bother? Why don't you just go and get a good quality essential amino acid? The actual cost of the products aren't going to be any different. And an essential amino acid supplement actually contains all of the branch chain amino acids anyway. So, it's a much more sensible and viable option.
One of the things that I found really interesting, because I had a look at your the website, Frontier Amino Power, and for those listening, part of the reason I've kept in touch with Al is he's my supplier for Frontier Amino Power, and the website's worth checking out. It is Frontier Amino Power. Search it, and it is an amino acid power that Alistair's been involved in developing and bringing to market. That's the entrepreneurial part of the introduction. But you've got a beautiful table there, Al, where it talks about protein utilization. You've got amino power versus eggs versus meat and fish versus whey, soy and plant proteins, and other bits and pieces. And that's staggering. For those who are listening, and you're curious, go and look this up, because the absorption or utilization of amino power is 99%. And I guess what that's speaking to, compared to eggs, which are at 50% and meat at 30-odd%, is speaking to the purity and the ease of absorption of these very small building blocks. There's no waste because the body's not breaking down other proteins. There's no loss, and it's effectively absorbed. Did you want to comment on that, Al?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for the shout out. I appreciate it. The reason why I initially created that supplement was because, like I said, about 20 years ago, I believe I was kind of in recovery from the vegetarian and the veganism. Yeah. And I wanted to find a way of kind of maximizing kind of protein synthesis. Yeah. And so I looked around, and at the time, there was something called the master amino acid, and it was being made in China, and it was being kind of sent, and it was quite expensive to get. And it was these huge, like, horse tablet pills, So it was quite an uncomfortable experience to have to get the protein in this way. But I intuitively knew, and also from a research perspective, knew this was an amazing product, but didn't seem to really go anywhere. Anyway, many years later, I was thinking of creating a product, and I was looking at kind of animal organs and, and animal foods and finding ways of getting there. And my mind just kind of remembered back to this master amino, And so I looked back at the research, and it came out of, I think it was Italy, with a Dr. Luca Moretti. And again, I'm very proud of this, because we really did base this product on like genuine research that happened in the 90s that really was quite significant, that most people don't know about. And it was the creation of this thing called the master amino pattern, which was basically these optimized ratios of the essential amino acids that created this kind of master amino pattern, which in short basically kind of stood for this way of understanding something called net nitrogen utilization. So every time you take a protein source, there is what's called nitrogen utilization, which is basically the ability to utilize all the amino acids with the minimum wastage possible. And so the higher the net nitrogen utilization, the less the wastage is. And so, as you rightfully said, on the website, we've got this approximation of a chart that shows that, our product, which is based off the original research, has a 97 to 99% utilization, which is extraordinary if you think about it. Yeah,
absolutely.
And going back to what we talked about muscle wastage in the elderly, or even people who have compromised immune systems, people in hospital, this kind of stuff, what was shown in the research study is people could take this amino powder without any extra exercise. They were developing lean muscle mass. So the absorption rate was so extraordinary and the body was so untaxed by it. And it was so direct that it was building muscle structure,
Yeah, okay.
you see, which is quite something.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah, it really is extraordinary. And of
It's
course,
almost like baking a cake by just having the ingredients and not doing the steps involved.
well, yeah, or yes, I mean it's a good analogy, but it's like baking a cake with the correct ingredients, or wondering why you've got a shitty cake when you keep on adding things that don't that shouldn't be in the recipe.
Exactly. But this is remarkable. It's literally like having the ingredients sitting on the table and suddenly a cake appears without even having to do any work. It's having all the ingredients available and the body makes muscle because it's asking to be done. So it's quite extraordinary.
Yeah, the ratios though, Warwick. So I jump in, I get excited about it because the ratios literally have to be quite specific within a certain kind of a bandwidth, as it were. Yeah, and so these ratios have to be very specific, and the amounts of the aminos have to be incorrect ratios and of a very significant amount. So we obviously did our due diligence because my kind of one of my co-business owners is a kind of PhD scientist, and so he has access to labs, and so we did assays on popular kind of amino-based supplementation, and they're either not actually an essential amino acid, or they're not going to have the net nitrogen utilization that a true formula would have. And that is important because we know that supplementation is expensive, and the truth of the matter is I'm in contact with many people in the industry, and certainly in America. Australia is better because we have a better kind of testing, and but America, it's all just shipped in from China, very poor quality products, very poor quality amounts. So for the listeners there, whether it be my product or anyone, really do your due diligence, on buying a product, because most of it is pretty crappy.
Yeah. Look, and I've got no reason to give you a shout out other than you're a mate and I've known you for a while and you are my supplier of amino acid powder, which is called Amino Power, and that's the Frontier product. I've been using it for a while. I believe it works. It's extremely easy to consume, very palatable. I think the flavor is grape. Whatever the flavor is, it's fairly innocuous. It dissolves very readily. As we were talking previously, I had a few extra bits and pieces, a little bit of magnesium, sometimes a bit of fiber, depending on what my area of interest is in terms of biohacking. I'll add a bit of extra to my shake. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Al, if we're looking to use an amino powder or an amino acid supplement, how do we use that gram per pound, that half a gram per kilo? How do we calculate that for an amino acid supplement?
Look, I wish I could be more scientifically precise than I'm about to. So I have to understand that this is an approximation. And the reason why it's an approximation is due to the things that we've said: absorption, the individual's absorption capacity. There are variables, it's all, everyone wants to have a gold standard, but bodies are different and how bodies respond to things are different. But on average, we would say that about 6.5 grams of a good quality essential amino acid powder would be the equivalent of 30 grams of whey protein powder. Okay, so a nice way of looking at that is imagine you get whey protein powder and you were able to put it through a filter and remove everything other than the aminos. Yeah, you'd be left with about 6.5, 7 grams of powder. Does that make sense? So yep. That means the rest of that powder is milk solid, superfluous excess. Yeah,
Phyllis of different description. How does that relate to, say, a piece of steak or an egg?
Well, again, it depends on how much steak you're eating, but a 200 gram of steak would probably have around 40 grams of protein, depending on the cut that you have. Yeah. So you can see that, one scoop of a high quality MAPS-based amino powder is, it's nearly competing with 170 grams of steak, you see?
Yeah.
So, but the way that I personally do it is, I think if you're going to bother using an amino acid powder, I would highly recommend not having it with any other protein source, because of course you're going to get other competing, amino acid chains.
Yep.
So that defeats the whole process. The absorption of a good quality amino acid powder takes place very rapidly. It would be between kind of 10 to 30 minutes. Yeah. So highly recommend not having it really with any other protein source. That would be perfect. Yeah. And if possible, I wouldn't have it with any carbs or fats either. That would be my preference. Yeah. Why? Well, the original research, because even carbohydrates can have low amounts of protein. You see? Yeah. So the original research that by Dr. Moretti, they went out of their way to find the lowest amino acid fruits and vegetables, to create a diet. So they stripped away, it was like watermelon, it was like iceberg lettuce, they were really looking at, at any food stuff that didn't have any protein or any fat. And they were using that as their adjunct to the amino intake, and they were getting amazing results with weight loss, for example, because I normally about twice a week, I go on I kind of have a bit of a 5-2 fasting kind of regime. I'm pretty much, keto carno, but now and again, every month, I might do 2 days of leaf, for example. I don't know. I just get this sense I'm going to have 2 days of leaf, and so I'll have a very basic salad. I'll have 2 very basic salads, just some kind of iceberg lettuce, bit of cucumber, a bit of avocado. I'll have that twice a day, and I'll have up to 6 to 8 scoops of amino powder. So what that's allowing me to do is not lose any muscle mass. Yes. Have some food that feels sustaining and voluming, because I used to fast a lot as back in the day. And, when we're fully fat adapted, fasting's very much easier. But even the first day is a pain in the ass. It's normally the second day where you're kind of comfortable with it. The first day is always a psychological kind of, moment, And these days, I just most of the time can't be bothered to put myself through that. So I just have this different way of doing it, which is a salad and 6 to 8 scoops of amino. And of course, I'm in an almost entire calorie deficit for that day. The amount of calories from that would be 300 calories or something, 400 calories. But I've got my protein with 400 calories. It's wild.
I'm really glad you raised this, because one of the questions I had on my list of questions was to ask about this restricted time eating and limiting how often you eat during the day. And I've flagged this on previous podcasts for the listeners out there, and I do it myself. I tend to have 1 meal a day. And I guess a couple of years ago, that was seen as quite an interesting way to regulate sugars, improve metabolic profiles, drop weight. And I sort of did it and experimented with it so that I could advise patients about it, and found it actually, for me, worked particularly well. And I think it worked particularly well for me because I noticed that I had a reduction in inflammation, particularly in the joints in my hands. And subsequent reading explains that through microbiome protection, actually. So for me, it's worked very well. I've actually stuck with it.
Yeah, amazing.
But in very recent time, there's been some counter noise about this sort of restricted eating, 1 meal a day type approach, particularly for women, and particularly because they run the risk of not getting enough protein in. And as we talked about how important that is, that can have longer term consequence. So I guess there's been a little bit of a cloud come over that way of eating. And I guess my question would be, if you are able to meal replace somewhere through the middle of the day with a protein or an amino supplement, then presumably you can negate those concerns. I mean, that's what I do at the moment, actually. I will often have a workout of some descriptor during the day and follow that with exactly the product we've been talking about. And I feel pretty comfortable doing it, but would the science support that and your understanding support that?
Well, I think we've got science, and then I think we've got emotion and psychology. And I think that they are 2 very distinct and important factors. So the original word diet came from a Greek word dieta, which means manner of living or way of life. So a true diet, has to really be a manner of living, rather than a short-term 3-day thing, The research keeps on changing, and I wouldn't want to be arrogant enough to be able to track that. I follow obviously doctors, keto doctors, standard American diet doctors, this kind of stuff on socials and YouTube. And every other week, there's a different story around fasting. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I'm in carnivore mode, for example, most carnivores, they don't really care about fasting. They just like eat when you want. And sometimes you might not eat all day. Sometimes you might eat 3 times a day, so they're very much more intuitive eating. Yeah. Keto people, well, they're a little bit more like, well, when you're fat adapted, you don't really care. So, you kind of get down to, or the one thing they do care about actually, which I did find out because I often tried to do keto and I failed. And I failed because I knew that you couldn't eat unlimited fat, but I certainly kind of thought, oh, I can probably get away with more fat because there is an argument that it's insulin that causes fat storage. And when there is no insulin present or insulin spikes, then the fat actually gets evacuated rather than stored as fat. So that's the argument for those people who are confused about, well, if you're on a keto diet, surely you can eat as much fat as you want. Well, you kind of can, but you have to be so low carbohydrate, because otherwise, as soon as a carb gets introduced, that excess fat will get stored. If there isn't any carbohydrate at all, then some of the research shows that it'll literally just get evacuated out. It doesn't get, stored. So that's interesting, isn't it? Because we start looking at why, going back to your original question about fasting, well, we can clearly see that fasting from carbohydrate, fasting from pure ketosis, fasting for autophagy, fasting in time restricted, your particular body type. I think there are so many variables, Warrick. I really do. Do you know what I mean? So I would much prefer to design a fasting program for the individual. That's the honest truth.
Yeah. Interesting. And you're right. There is so much stuff that comes out on a regular basis around what we should be doing to best look after ourselves. I have to say, this time restricted eating for me has worked much better than I thought it would. It took me weeks and weeks to get used to not having breakfast. But I've become adapted to it now and feel pretty good on it, actually.
Could you have a bulletproof coffee or something in the morning?
Yeah. I actually started the whole process doing bulletproof coffees. For those who are listening and don't know what a bulletproof coffee is, Dave Asprey made that popular. The idea is you take a coffee and blend some butter. He talks about yak fat, basically, but any old butter, green, produced by cows that are fed on grass, not grain. But the idea is you have a coffee basically with a fat hit that carries you through. He also talks about using medium chain triglycerides in the same way. So I did all that for a number of weeks. These days, I just have a coffee with a teaspoon of cream. Do that first thing in the morning, then several hours later, and 4:35, 6 o'clock, I'm starting to think I'd be pretty happy to have something to eat now. But no, it's worked well for me. Tell me about people who might be buying protein supplements that are from animal product or plant product. Is there a difference in that? If you're thinking about these things as building blocks, does it really make a difference other than your own personal philosophical stance?
I really think it does. I think that vegans and carnivores should kind of hold hands, and I think we should all get together and work for better quality product, more better quality agriculture and farming. I think there needs to be a meeting in the middle there rather than this kind of battle. But saying that, and I met a lady on one of my last courses who trained with me, and she was a world champion bodybuilder and a vegan bodybuilder, so incredibly impressive, And I said, well, kind of, how do you do it? And she was like, well, she used a lot of kind of tofu and soy product and that kind of stuff. And I've always said, to people who kind of laugh because they go, oh, Al, you don't like vegans and that kind of stuff. I'm saying, oh, no, that's ridiculous. Of course, everyone, is an individual. But I would always say, if you are going to be a vegan, you need to be a better vegan, build a better vegan body. Does that make sense? Yep. In the same with anything, it's like, how do we do it to the best? So obviously vegans can do it because this woman is living proof of this. Yeah. But I gave her some of the aminos, and she certainly likes it, and recognizes that it's going to make her life a lot easier. I would imagine having this ability as a vegan to have this amino source. So to answer your question very directly, the research seems to show that in this kind of net nitrogen kind of neutral utilization, kind of area, that unfortunately vegan proteins just aren't absorbed and don't carry across the amino profile as well as meat-based proteins. So what that means is you're going to have more of them. So I would say in many ways, you would have to have 60 grams of a plant-based protein, like a pea protein or a rice protein, to every 30 grams of whey protein. Just to get the equivalent actual amount of protein that it says on the tin. I don't know how they get away with assays. Like, I think you can get away, like I said, this is the interesting part of it. You can get away with saying it has this much protein as a grammage, but if you actually did the assay on the amino acid, profile, that would be interesting to me.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We're going to wrap up. I did say to you from the very beginning that we'd try and keep this to 10 or 15 minutes, like my standard podcast, but we've easily gone way past half an hour, and it's an absolute delight and it's fascinating and I really hope that the people listening are finding this something that they really stop and have a think about, because I think particularly as we get a little bit older, we need to be aware of getting these important components into our diet for our best health journey. But I want to come back and I want to get this myself. We're talking, and I'll go to grams per kilogram. We're talking about 0.5 grams per kilogram as what I should be taking. If we said I'm about 70 odd kilos, then I need, if we're talking lean mass, I need about then I'm about 60 kilos lean, which is about 30 grams of protein. Is that about right per day?
You're 60 kilo.
I'm about 70 kilos, knock off the fat, talk about lean mass.
We're talking about overall body weight rather than just...
Okay, 70 kilos. Let's say 70 kilos.
So for me, I would double it, put it into pounds. So I go about 170, 150 pounds. Yep. And so I would say 150 grams of protein.
Now, if I'm going to get that 150 grams of protein, we talked about 150 grams steak, for example. There's only 30 or 40 odd grams of protein in that, isn't there?
Yep.
And we're talking about a scoop of amino powder at 6.5 grams being about 30 grams of whey protein, or about the same as 150 gram steak. So 3 scoops of amino powder would get me over the line or get me close?
No, you would need 5. 3, 5, and 50. So you need 5. You need 5 scoops of a good quality, full essential amino acid.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 30 gram equivalent each. So 5. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Did everyone get that?
That one was for you, Warrick. As long as you get it. But
if anyone's curious about getting those numbers, I think I've got it. So a scoop of the amino is about 30 grams of protein, and you work it from there.
Because remember that we're using kind of standard metrics that everyone uses on the back of a protein tub.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's what we... I think the most important thing is focus. Most people in this space, I'm an ex-personal trainer from London. Like I said, I'm retraining as a nutritionist. I follow this adamantly like you do, Warrick. And I think rather than getting bogged down by everything, most people now are saying focus on protein as your dominant macro. So really try and do your best to hit that protein macro. Even if you're doing it with plant protein or whey or meat or whatever, do that and then just get better at it. Does that make sense? Meet it first and then find ways of improving it.
I will actually just, as we wrap up, I really will encourage people to go and have a look at your site, that Frontier Amino Power site, and look at that comparison for amino utilization or protein formation. The bioavailability of these amino acid supplements, and this one in particular that's yours, but I'm sure some of the other amino acid supplements are the same, Al. But this bioavailability really is a great bang for your buck in terms of trying to get that in, because we're really talking, I do 5 scoops of amino powder to get my daily requirement. The alternate would be, well, probably over 500 grams of steak, actually, which is a lot.
It is, but I'm not going to in any way claim that I would build my diet around that. I believe supplementation is supplementation and really useful specific outcomes. So like I take 1 to 2 scoops a day. That's all I do, and I'll take it. Normally I take it actually before and after exercise. So that's how I do it. I do think that as you get older, or you're putting yourself under significant, exercise, then you would do very well to take a high quality amino acid powder. I think you've got immune concerns, neurotransmitter concerns. So, for example, in our product, we have L-lysine, for example, L-lysine in very high amounts. Well, for those of you who have compromised immune systems and are doing things like kind of cold sores and that kind of stuff, I mean, just the amount of lysine in our product is 3 times the amount of, a standard lysine supplement on the shelf. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
Or things like tryptophan, the one that is great for your mood. Again, a very high quality. And there's about 4 of us in the market. Most others, I've got to be honest, aren't. There are 4 of us in the market who I would say we've assayed and are of good quality. And the amount is important. Does that make sense? This is fundamental. Just because it says essential amino acid, it's like, yeah, sure, but it means nothing.
And the magic ratio is presumably important as well, from what you've said through this interview.
I really do think so. People massively underestimate the component blocks of an amino acid, essential amino acid, and what they can do. If we go through it just in 10 seconds, do you know what I mean? Like just 10 seconds. You've got all of the branch chain amino acids in an essential amino acid. You've got lysine, you've got tryptophan, which is for your mood. You've got phenylalanine, which is for stress. You've got methionine, which helps your body detox. You've got threonine, which is kind of helping the body with collagen, muscle tissue, antibodies, mucous membranes. A good quality essential amino acid. I mean, there's a good reason why amino means primary in Greek. It means the first. And there's a good reason why it means the first.
Look, this has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed talking to you, Al. We've gone back and forth on some of this stuff, but it's an absolute pleasure to have you find some time so we can talk this through and share it, because I really do want to get this sort of information out to the people who are listening. I'm going to wrap it up there. Again, thank you so much.
No, thank you, Warrick. It's a real pleasure. And I know I get excited and can't wait to communicate information, but it is exciting. And thanks for giving me a platform and a place to do it. Really appreciate it.
Look, I'm excited as well, and genuinely appreciate your time and putting some time aside to share. So for those who are listening, I really do hope you got something out of it. If you do get confused on those calculations, please feel free to reach out to me. I've written it all down. As always, if you've got any queries or questions, drop us a line at info@drwarrickbishop.online. And till next time, wish you the very best. Hope you live as well as possible for as long as possible. Thanks so much for tuning in. Take care and bye for now.